It was the day of the big presentation. Hannah and I sat in the conference room, our heads in our hands, devastated by the sight before us. The carefully printed handouts we had prepared were now completely drenched in coffee, rendering them utterly useless.
What are we going to do now?
Hannah lamented, her voice tinged with despair. Despite our predicament, the presentation moderator relentlessly urged us to take the stage, disregarding our distress. To make matters worse, as our audience consisted of international companies, today's presentation was to be delivered in multiple foreign languages. The attendees were primarily from Europe, so we had planned to incorporate French and Italian throughout the presentation. Hannah and I had prepared the presentation materials in various languages. She was planning to give the explanation while referencing those documents, but without them, even she couldn't proceed with the presentation. Hannah tried to make her way to the podium, her face ashen, determined to somehow manage. I instinctively placed my hand on her shoulder, stopping her. Camila, who had likely orchestrated this situation, was underestimating me. She thought that without the materials, we would be rendered helpless. I would show her just how mistaken that notion was. My name is Glenda. I'm 32 years old. For as long as I can remember, I've lived abroad. My dad had been assigned overseas for work. Every few years, we moved to different countries, immersed in diverse languages and cultures. There were times when I struggled to adapt to unfamiliar environments, but now, those experiences are cherished memories. I returned to the United States when I was 15. As I entered high school, Mom and I decided it was time to settle down in one place, so we came back to America together. Having grown up in foreign lands and exposed to multiple languages, I hoped to find a way to utilize my talents in the US. However, my aspirations were swiftly shattered. After the entrance ceremony, we gathered in the classroom for self-introductions. I confidently shared my experiences living abroad and my proficiency in various languages. If you have any questions about foreign languages, feel free to ask me anything. As I looked around, I finally noticed the odd expressions on everyone's faces. I later learned that my English accent was apparently a bit strange at the time. However, in the countries where I had lived before, no one minded if someone's language usage was slightly off. They were more interested in the content of the conversation than the person's manner of speaking. But in America, or at least among my high school classmates, it was different. They all laughed at my peculiar English. Whenever I spoke, they would snicker and whisper to each other. Eventually, they started calling me pushy and insensitive to social cues. No matter what I did, I was always the center of attention, ridiculed, or gossiped about. I constantly felt the cold stares of my classmates. Over time, I became convinced that everyone was mocking me no matter what I did, and I started silently staring down at the corner of the classroom. But then, someone appeared before me in that state. Her name was Hannah, a girl 1 year older. She was a member of the Foreign Language Club and had heard rumors about a third culture kid enrolling, so she sought me out. By that point, I had become terrified of drawing attention, so I tried to send Hannah away when she approached me, but she kept coming to see me. Perhaps she was curious about why I was so guarded despite her repeated attempts to talk to me. One time, she asked me the reason. I couldn't help but confess how my English and behavior were strange, causing me to feel isolated from the class. Upon hearing that, a beaming smile spread across her beautiful face. And then she said to me, "That's not true at all. Your way of speaking and your actions are adorable. But if it bothers you that much, I'll teach you English, and in exchange, you can teach me foreign languages." From that day on, until Hannah graduated, I met with her every day to talk about various things. She engaged with me sincerely, not out of pity. She patiently taught me the intricacies of English and helped me navigate cultural differences when I struggled. And she always, "It's okay, you're speaking just fine. You're not doing anything weird. Be confident," encouraged me, saying. By the time Hannah graduated, thanks to her, I had regained my confidence. Time passed, and I was headhunted by a company for a mid-career position. The one who had recruited me was none other than her. With her exceptional abilities, Hannah had become the sales department manager, captivating those around her not only with her competence but also her natural beauty and outstanding leadership. Persuaded by her, who said, "I need your help," I decided to join the company as well. Of course, I wanted to utilize my language talents and prove my worth in the international business arena, but more than anything, I wanted to repay her for supporting me during my difficult times. And so, I joined the company and was assigned to Hannah's department. In that department, there was also a section chief named Camila. It only took a brief exchange of words during my introduction to realize it. She was a self-centered person who looked down on others. And above all, she seemed to harbor an abnormal level of hostility towards Hannah. I felt a bit uneasy, but I focused on learning my job to quickly adapt to this new environment. At that time, I was not yet aware that this presence would begin to cast a dark shadow over my life. Half a year after joining the company, my days gradually lost motivation due to Camila's harassment.
Here, take care of this too. Well then, I'm heading out first.
Camila approached my desk, said those words, and placed a large stack of documents. Upon closer inspection, I realized they were already approved documents. She probably meant for me to file them away. It was sad that I had come to understand her intentions without being told during these past 6 months. I glanced at the clock. The hands indicated that there were about 10 minutes left until the end of working hours. It was a usual occurrence for her to deliberately bring a large amount of work at this hour and start preparing to leave even before the end of the workday. I suppressed the sigh that threatened to escape and started tackling the work that had been forced upon me. From the very day I joined the company, she kept pushing various tasks onto me. The volume increased day by day, and my overtime hours grew proportionately. Yet, she would say things like,
"Why are you always working so much overtime? You're slow at your job, aren't you? You're incompetent. You should learn from me, who always leaves on time, and put in some effort to go home earlier."
In the beginning, I strived to improve my work efficiency to leave earlier, as Camila suggested. However, the more I streamlined my tasks, the more work she would dump on me. Now, I overheard people in the department gossiping that she might not be doing any work other than approvals. Still, work is work, and I didn't want to stand out in a bad way by doing something wrong, like in high school, and be seen in a strange light. So, I had no choice but to complete the tasks she assigned to me. However, Camila refused to acknowledge my efforts and made me revise the reports and project proposals I had painstakingly completed multiple times, citing trivial mistakes. The workload kept increasing. Nevertheless, I managed to work until the last train, putting in my best effort to create a project proposal that I thought was perfect. Hannah, who was worried about me, came to check on me and reviewed the proposal, giving me her approval as well. Although sleep-deprived, I headed to work with a light step for the first time in a while. First thing in the morning, I submitted the project proposal I had created to Camila. She read through the proposal I had prepared. Eventually, her brow furrowed and her eyes narrowed in displeasure.
"What is this? This is useless, it's garbage."
Surprisingly, she spat those words out and tore up the project proposal I had made right then and there. She ripped it into tiny pieces in front of my eyes and tossed them into the air. My painstakingly crafted proposal, what used to be a proposal, fluttered like confetti. Tears welled up in my eyes at the sheer absurdity of it all. Seeing me trying my hardest not to cry, she laughed mockingly.
Yeah, you think crying will solve everything?
Don't get emotional, it's unsightly. This isn't preschool. As punishment, clean up this mess. Snorting, she dismissed me as if shooing away a dog. Unable to bear it, I fled the scene and rushed into the restroom. The tears I had been holding back spilled forth. Concerned colleagues came to check on me, but I couldn't leave the restroom. About 5 minutes later, perhaps informed by someone, even Hannah came to the restroom. "Are you okay? I know very well that you are capable. And you yourself know your own abilities best, don't you?" Hannah encouraged me through the door. Then, she said she would talk to Camila and left the restroom. About 5 minutes later, when I finally managed to stop crying and return to the office, the torn pieces of the project proposal had been neatly cleaned up. According to a colleague who came to check on me, Hannah had scolded Camila in front of everyone, saying that her treatment of her subordinate was too harsh. However, Hannah's kindness only served to fuel Camila's hostility towards me. Her harassment escalated further, knowing no bounds. That harassment gradually robbed me of my passion for work. Even so, I endured day after day, striving to meet her expectations. Then one day, a shocking incident occurred. The documents for an important project that Hannah and I were in charge of had disappeared. The documents were the ones I had spent a week gathering under her instructions, containing both internal and external confidential data. I was uneasy about storing them on the computer, so I saved them only on a USB drive and kept it under strict management in a locked drawer. However, that USB drive had vanished from inside the drawer. The company was in an uproar, with everyone in the department searching for the USB drive, and even the sales division director getting involved. Of course, Camila, Hannah, and I were questioned about the situation. Unfortunately, on the night before the disappearance, I had been working overtime at Camila's instructions. And when I left, I had confirmed that the USB drive was in the drawer and made sure to lock it before going home. But when I arrived this morning, the drawer was unlocked and the USB drive was gone.
You must have carelessly forgotten to lock it. How do you plan to take responsibility?
I was the one who instructed her to gather those documents, save them on the USB drive, and store it securely. It's also my lack of oversight.
That's right. It's also the manager's responsibility. Now, how do you intend to take responsibility?
Camila gleefully accused us while closing in on us. If it's a matter of lack of oversight, Camila, as the section chief, should also have had the obligation to supervise and manage me, her subordinate, but apparently that wasn't an issue. The sales division director had a stern look on his face, but he stopped Camila from pressing us further. However, it wasn't a complete exoneration. He only said that he wouldn't pursue responsibility until the investigation results were out. Moreover, we were strictly told to thoroughly manage data from now on. The sales division director probably believed that I had lost it. My reputation might have taken a significant hit, but there was something more important at the moment. At this rate, the project would be delayed. This was a crucial project for the company Hannah was involved with. We absolutely couldn't allow it to be delayed. From that day on, I stayed at the office until the last train every day and started gathering the lost data from scratch. Every day, I would stay at the company until the last possible moment to catch the last train and then sprint with all my might to make it on board. Concerned colleagues brought me snacks and coffee, but Camila did nothing during that time. On top of that, she kept pushing miscellaneous tasks onto me as usual and repeatedly threw mocking words at me while sneering.
You really do love working overtime, don't you? You're so incompetent that you can't earn money otherwise. I'll bestow some work upon you out of pity.
Saying that, she would dump miscellaneous tasks that anyone could do on me right before the end of working hours. And as always, she would leave on time. Fed up with the situation, a colleague took on the tasks Camila had pushed onto me, allowing me to focus on my own work. I immersed myself in rebuilding the data. At times, I felt like crying from exhaustion, but I couldn't give up. And with the project deadline approaching, I finally managed to reconstruct the lost data and successfully complete the project. Hannah was genuinely delighted by my success, and all my colleagues praised my efforts. Camila also commended me, but I didn't miss the evident jealousy in her eyes. Thanks to Hannah and my achievement of brilliantly leading an important project that was on the brink of delay to great success, we were entrusted with an even more significant project. It was a presentation at a certain famous overseas company. Moreover, it wasn't just any presentation. It was a competitive presentation where multiple rival companies would also be present. That company had been operating primarily in Europe and Asia, with employees and business partners mostly from overseas. It was the first time an American company had the opportunity to give a presentation. If we could succeed in this presentation and secure a deal, it would open up prospects for transactions with European and Asian companies as well. It was a chance we couldn't afford to miss for the further development of our company. I was given the opportunity to handle such an important presentation that held the future of the company in the balance, together with Hannah. The passion for work that had been extinguished by Camila's numerous instances of harassment reignited within me. I had numerous discussions with Hannah and proceeded with the preparations for the presentation. We created project proposals and materials, received Hannah's feedback, and revised them day after day. However, unlike being forced to redo them countless times by Camila for no reason, the revisions had clear purposes, so it didn't feel like a burden at all. In fact, it was almost enjoyable. During that time, Camila was eerily quiet. It was strange, but anyone would understand that it would be problematic to interfere with a presentation that held the company's future in the balance. I concluded that even Camila possessed that level of common sense and decency. And finally, the presentation materials were completed. From the perspective of the client, we created materials that addressed their concerns and made them feel confident in entrusting the project to our company. Upon seeing the finished materials, even Hannah's eyes welled up with tears.
It's perfect! I've never seen such outstanding materials before. With this, they'll definitely choose our company.
Hannah reviewed the materials with a serious expression multiple times before saying those words to commend me. I felt overjoyed to the point of wanting to jump up and down, having my painstakingly crafted materials, which I had worked on to the point of almost missing the last train numerous times, be recognized. On the day before the presentation, we proceeded with the preparations by printing the materials and compiling any potentially necessary data onto USB drives. For the first time in a while, I went home early to rest my body in preparation for the next day. And then, the day of the presentation arrived. Hannah and I were in the conference room that served as the presentation venue, holding our heads in our hands. The documents that had been printed and packed in a bag were, for some reason, completely drenched in coffee. Of course, I hadn't put any beverages inside the bag that also contained a laptop. In fact, I hadn't put a single item that contained moisture in it. Yet, the documents that were perfectly fine when I checked them 30 minutes before leaving the company were now soaked in coffee. And to make matters worse, even the laptop and USB drives were drenched in coffee. I had put them in a sealed plastic bag to prevent any accidents, but even inside that plastic bag, a generous amount of coffee had been poured. The pleasant aroma of slightly expensive milk coffee that could be purchased from the paper cup vending machine installed in the company filled the air. I recognized that smell. It was the smell of the coffee Camila always drank while slacking off and pushing work onto me. The thought that I had smelled it frequently enough to remember it made anger suddenly well up inside me.
Oh, what should we do now?
Beside me, as my anger grew, Hannah lamented while still holding her head in her hands. Disregarding our situation, the moderator of the presentation urged us to take the stage. Hannah looked around with a pale face. As we remained unmoving, not getting on stage or presenting any materials.
If you're not going to present, then leave.
Impatient voices from rival companies started to rise, saying, even so, being an overseas company, today's presentation was to be conducted in foreign languages. Moreover, since the person in charge was from the European region, the plan was to incorporate not only English but also French and Italian. The presentation materials had been prepared in various languages. Hannah was supposed to provide explanations while referencing them, but even she probably couldn't give the presentation without the materials. With an ashen face, Hannah still tried to make her way to the podium somehow. Instinctively, I placed my hand on her shoulder and stopped her. I didn't like standing out. The thought of being looked at strangely by everyone again, like in my high school days, or returning to a life where I was laughed at no matter what I did, made my legs tremble with trauma. However, Hannah, who had helped me out of those days, was in trouble. If I couldn't do anything here, when would I ever be able to repay the favor from back then? Camila was likely underestimating me. She thought that without the materials, I wouldn't be able to do anything. I would show her how naive that notion was. I smiled at Hannah and stepped onto the stage with shaking legs. Everyone's gaze focused on me. To dispel my fear, I deliberately put on a beaming smile. Everyone, I apologize for the wait. It seems our company's bag disappeared along with the materials using some kind of trick. While switching between French, Italian, German, and Chinese, I struck a pose in front of my chest, mimicking a magician. Laughter erupted from the host's table, where an irritated atmosphere had been looming. The opening wasn't bad. With this, I could somehow manage.
But don't worry, all the materials are in my head. We will deliver the physical documents at a later date, so for now, would you be so kind as to listen to my talk?
With that introduction, I began the presentation in various languages. Of course, it was a lie that I had memorized all the materials. But because I had revised them countless times, 80% of the content was in my head. I primarily used French, supplementing complex points with various languages from different countries. Before I knew it, everyone in the venue was listening intently to my talk with serious expressions, and when the presentation ended, the room was filled with applause and words of praise. The subsequent Q&A session was also lively, with numerous questions being exchanged. My presentation had achieved success beyond expectations. After the presentation, I stepped down from the stage, feeling relieved. The fear and anxiety in my heart had transformed into confidence and a sense of accomplishment.
Glenda, you did great! The presentation was a huge success, as expected of you.
Hannah, who usually spoke in a calm voice, rushed over to me, overcome with emotion. Her voice alone conveyed that my presentation had turned out far better than imagined. Seeing Hannah's expression change from one filled with despair just moments ago to a beaming smile, I sincerely felt glad that I had mustered the courage to give the presentation. However, the real issue was what came next. Why were the presentation materials drenched in coffee? I didn't know the reason, but there was no doubt that malicious intent was involved. And I had a strong suspicion about the person who had done it. However, there was no evidence. Despite my concerns, I returned to the company and resumed my daily routine. The only change was that I started recording the verbal abuse, unreasonable reprimands, and various acts of harassment I received from Camila. I also wrote down past incidents to the best of my memory. Meanwhile, I kept a close watch on her behavior. She frequently stepped away from her desk to take phone calls on her smartphone. Her voice lowered to a whisper as she headed for quiet, secluded areas. Normally, Camila wouldn't think twice about taking personal calls, chatting away loudly in the office. Curious about what she could be discussing, I discreetly followed her, staying out of sight. I knew it was impolite to eavesdrop, but something about the way the usually brazen she was sneaking around to have hushed conversations felt undeniably suspicious. Camila slipped into the file room, a place rarely visited by anyone during the workday. I couldn't go all the way in after her, so I paused outside the door. That's when I heard her angry voice emanating from within.
Don't give me that! I went to the trouble of sabotaging the files, and now you're telling me your presentation is about to lose? That's on you and your shoddy work, not me.
Hearing this, I instinctively pulled out my smartphone and started recording.
That money was compensation for leaking the files and ruining the presentation materials. How dare you ask for it back now?
Either she didn't realize I was nearby, or she didn't care, because Camila kept right on yelling at the person on the other end of the line. My mind flashed back to the USB drive that had mysteriously vanished a while ago. We had stored confidential company documents on it, locked it in a drawer, and kept it under tight security, yet somehow it had disappeared. Could it be that Camila had stolen it? Messing with presentation files was one thing, but taking internal information to sell to someone else was completely unacceptable. Camila was still talking, but I turned and headed straight for Hannah's office. I played the recording for her and honestly recounted everything I had overheard. Hannah's expression darkened, her face grave, as she listened to the part where she mentioned the money.
This is a huge problem. Glenda, your actions have brought this issue to light.
Hannah said she would report it to the higher-ups and suggest a full investigation. In that case, I would do my part to gather more information and evidence to assist her. Camila was about to lose everything due to her own short-sighted actions. 1 week after the competing presentation, Hannah informed me that our proposal had been selected and the deal was going forward. Apparently, she had already reported everything that happened that day to the CEO, and he would be coming by soon to personally commend me. As embarrassed as I felt, my happiness won out, and I couldn't help but smile. My dad's job had us moving around a lot, and it had caused me plenty of hardship, but thanks to that, I was now able to be of use to Hannah and the company. The thought filled me with a sense of pride. Hannah and everyone in the department was as thrilled as if it had happened to them personally, and soon there was talk of a celebration. But amidst all the smiles, only Camila looked grim. It made sense, of course. Camila had sabotaged our presentation materials in an attempt to make us fail. And she'd been paid by someone to do it. Now that her scheme had fallen through, she would naturally have to return whatever money she'd been given. But maybe there was even more to it than that. I could see the fear in her eyes, the way her shoulders trembled every time her phone rang. Still, this was far from over. I stayed late to finish the busy work Camila had foisted on me, searching for evidence of her misdeeds whenever I could. Even mundane tasks like shredding documents and organizing email inboxes took on new meaning when I considered they might lead to proof of her actions. More than anything, Camila clearly underestimated me, because clues kept popping up one after another. It was actually kind of fun. In the papers I was supposed to shred, I found printouts of the missing confidential files. In her sent mail folder, there were emails where she had forwarded the presentation data to someone outside the company. Her complete lack of care when it came to handling evidence was so egregious, I almost wondered if it was some kind of trap. I was curious as to why there was so much evidence in the first place, but with this much compiled, I knew I could corner her. And as luck would have it, the CEO was planning to come praise me in person soon. I resolved that when he did, I would expose the full extent of Camila's repeated wrongdoings in front of everyone. With renewed determination, I threw myself into completing my menial assignments and gathering evidence. Finally, the long-awaited day arrived when the CEO was slated to visit our sales department. The momentous occasion had everyone on edge from the moment we arrived that morning. The sound of the door to our floor opening caused all eyes to swivel in that direction at once. There, as expected, stood the CEO, the sales director, and Hannah.
Ah, you must be Glenda. I heard from the client and Hannah that you put together a truly excellent presentation.
It's all thanks to Hannah's mentoring and guidance. I responded to the CEO's words with complete sincerity. I could see Camila's displeased expression out of the corner of my eye.
Excuse me, but you're my subordinate. I'm the one who's been instructing you the most, so you should be giving me the credit here.
Camila started making a scene, right there in front of the CEO. In the past, I would have flashed her an insincere smile and agreed, but not anymore. I fixed Camila with a steely glare.
With all due respect, while you have pushed your work onto me and yelled at me unreasonably, I don't recall ever being mentored by you, I said calmly, looking Camila straight in the eye. What? That's a lie!
Camila shouted, furrowing her brow in anger. Unfazed, I turned my gaze to the CEO. I had gathered plenty of evidence for this very moment. It was time for Camila to reflect on her actions.
Mr. CEO, while the department heads may have already reported this to you, she has been treating her subordinates unreasonably and dumping her work on them. Not only that, she's even been causing damage to the company. Huh? What nonsense are you spouting? I wonder which one of us is spouting nonsense here,
I retorted, brushing off Camila's vehement denial as I presented the additional evidence I had collected. I reiterated how Camila had handed over important documents to someone in exchange for money and how she had tried to sabotage our presentation.
Isn't that right, Camila?
I confronted her directly. However, a malicious smile spread across Camila's face.
Don't lie. That was all you and Hannah, wasn't it? You're trying to pin the blame on me, she accused, her voice dripping with venom.
What? I was taken aback by Camila's sudden allegation. Hannah too seemed shocked to find herself implicated, unable to hide her surprise. Seeing our reactions, Camila's malevolent grin only deepened. Think about it logically. You claim you found evidence in the trash and emails I dumped on you, but do you really think I'd handle important things so carelessly? No way. It makes more sense that you and Hannah staged this to frame me. If you were the culprits, you'd have plenty of evidence. Camila argued, narrowing her eyes shrewdly. I had to admit, it did seem odd that so much evidence was found so easily. But now it all made sense. Camila had intentionally let us find the evidence to paint herself as a victim framed by our scheme, claiming Hannah and I were the true culprits. If I had been incompetent enough not to realize this, she probably planned to present it as her discovering evidence of my wrongdoing.
We did no such thing.
Lies. Or do you have any proof that I did it?
We do, actually.
Hannah's calm voice rang out. All eyes turned to her.
First, regarding you leaking confidential company information for money. We have your own words admitting to this, Camila.
Hannah said, giving me a meaningful look. I took out my smartphone and played the recording. It's Camila's phone call that day.
Eavesdropping? No way. No. This is fabricated, totally made up.
Camila started to yell, but then seemed to realize it would be taken as a confession. In a fluster, she tried to paint herself as the victim of our setup. But Hannah continued undeterred.
It was also you who drenched our presentation materials in coffee. Everyone in the department can testify that it's the same coffee you always drink. So what? You just chose that coffee to frame me.
Camila glared at Hannah, shouting in an attempt to push the blame onto us at all costs. Her gaze was filled with clear hostility. However, Hannah refuted her claim with a relaxed air.
No, that won't work. On that day, we did a final check 30 minutes before leaving the office. At that time, both the documents and laptop were perfectly fine. Meaning the materials were ruined in that short 30-minute window.
Hannah explained, pausing for a moment. She then placed a paper cup on the table. It was one of those cups from the coffee vending machine. A short size, or maybe one size smaller.
This paper cup is from that vending machine over there. To completely soak the documents and laptop in my bag, you'd need quite a few cups. At least 10, I'd say. Buying that many yourself in a 30-minute span would be very conspicuous. And Camila, you're too lazy to go buy them yourself, Hannah pointed out.
Camila's shoulders trembled at Hannah's words. Hannah smiled at the unnerved Camila.
Our colleagues in the department testified that you had various people fetching coffee for you that day. Many witnessed the untouched coffee cups lining your desk. This was shortly before our departure time. And after we left, those many cups had vanished from your desk and our documents and laptop were drenched in coffee. Anyone can figure out what that means, Hannah said pointedly.
Despite Hannah's sharp reasoning, Camila stubbornly continued making excuses.
I don't know what you're talking about. Everyone's just trying to frame me because they're jealous of how talented I am.
Since joining the company, I had never once seen her do any real work. I couldn't fathom how anyone could be jealous of her talent. I could understand if everyone thought this lazybones. I won't forgive her when it came to her. I found myself curious about how Camila's mind worked to reach such conclusions.
That's not true at all, these are the facts. But hypothetically, if that were the case, why do you think you ended up in a situation where your entire department is trying to frame you? Perhaps you should ask yourself that.
Hannah admonished Camila in a calm voice. In contrast, Camila bit her lip, her face contorted with rage. But Hannah didn't stop there.
We also know from email correspondence, phone records, and security camera footage that you stole confidential company information and tried to sabotage the presentation to damage the company. The CEO is already aware of this.
At those words, the color drained from Camila's face. She looked at the CEO in a panic. The CEO stared back at Camila with contempt in his eyes.
Not only damaging the company, but trying to pin your crimes on someone else? I never thought you were that kind of person.
Camila's face turned ashen at the CEO's words. Everyone in the department, including the head of sales, looked at her with cold, unforgiving eyes.
No way! Everyone knows I'm talented. It's the company's fault for promoting someone like Hannah over me. That's why I wanted to force Hannah's favorite to quit and ruin their career. I did nothing wrong.
Camila insisted like a petulant child, seeking agreement from those around her. But of course, no one took her side. Even the CEO held his head in his hands.
Hiring you was the biggest mistake of my life. But fortunately, it's a mistake that can be easily corrected,
he said, eyeing Camila with a quiet fury.
Camila, incompetent and nasty people like you are fired. I won't forgive you for the damage you've caused our company, so be prepared for the consequences. Fired? You're firing me?
Camila let out a scream of disbelief, her face deathly pale. As she struggled to accept reality, Hannah, the head of sales, and everyone in the department nodded emphatically in agreement with the CEO's decision to fire her. I too smiled at Camila.
That's right, you're the one being fired.
At my words, Camila crumpled to the ground. Afterwards, Camila was officially terminated. Apparently, the upper management's investigation revealed that Camila had committed many more offenses that even I wasn't aware of. The USB drive containing confidential company information that I was suspected of losing? It turns out she had stolen that too. The CEO and Hannah expressed their gratitude, saying that my accusation had prompted the higher-ups to launch a full investigation, exposing many of Camila's misdeeds. It seems the information Camila stole was sold to competitors, causing our company to lose profits to rival firms. Not only was she fired, but she's also being sued for damages. While Camila likely has the money she earned from selling our company's information, the funds she received in exchange for sabotaging the competitor's presentation will probably have to be returned at their demand. I don't know what will happen to her now that both the company and her client are demanding money from her, but her future is certainly bleaker than mine ever was in high school. With Camila gone, the vacant section chief position was somehow given to me. I told Hannah that there were many people more suited for the role than me, as I hadn't even been with the company for a year, but she wouldn't hear of it. In fact, everyone in the department recommended me for the position. They said that seeing me work diligently without complaint, even as Camila treated me like a servant and harassed me, made them want someone like me as their boss. Hannah promised to personally teach me about management and other necessary skills. While I'm anxious, I'm also excited for this new step in my career. Even as section chief, I won't become like Camila. I'll continue to work hard for the sake of the department and the people who believe in me. Arya placed instant ramen in front of me.
There's only enough for the family.
I couldn't understand what Arya was saying.
Should I head home?
Kevin said just that and started towards the entrance.
Yes.
I also stood up and followed Kevin. I'm sorry for everything that happened. Like emotions bursting out, I told Kevin everything up to now. How Arya had suddenly changed her attitude towards me. My name is Harper. I'm a 56-year-old housewife. My husband's name is Kevin. Kevin and I worked at the same company. It was what you'd call an office romance. I was in accounting, and Kevin was in sales, different departments, but he would often come to accounting. Kevin used to distribute souvenirs from his business trips to the accounting department. Kevin was thoughtful and kind. Whenever I had to go to the sales department for receipt verification, Kevin was the first to help. Even when it wasn't his fault, Kevin would always apologize. His handling was sincere, and his smile was kind. I was secretly attracted to him, but too embarrassed to make the first move, so we continued as colleagues for a while. Then, one time, it came to light that one of the employees was falsifying receipt processing. Kevin cooperated with the accounting department, worked hard to uncover the truth, and when it was resolved, he invited me to a dinner under the pretense of a consolation party. I thought it would be a group outing, but it was just Kevin and me. I was surprised, but more so delighted. Dinner with Kevin was so enjoyable that I lost track of time. We shared a hobby, or rather a way of thinking, like finding it fun when the numbers in the ledger matched perfectly. After that, we went out to eat several times, and went on dates. After about 6 months of this, Kevin proposed to me. I pretended to think about it, but was extremely happy. I tried to keep him in suspense for about a week, but my happiness got the better of me, and I said yes the next day. Kevin has been very kind since we first met. That hasn't changed, even now that we're married. He always thinks of me. He makes sure we have quality time together as a couple. I consider myself very lucky to be married to Kevin. I continued working after we got married, but I quit when I got pregnant with our eldest son, Brian. Brian's birth was difficult. He was breech. Kevin was told by the doctor that it could endanger either of our lives. Despite this, we doted on Brian when he was born. Brian was a mischief maker, leaving the house covered in doodles, dismantling toys quickly. Still, we didn't scold him and let him grow up freely. Because of the risks associated with pregnancy and childbirth, Kevin and I decided that Brian would be our only child. For that reason, Brian was our precious treasure. In kindergarten and early elementary school, he was so free-spirited that he caused his teachers quite a bit of trouble. We were cautioned at numerous parent-teacher conferences. However, as he moved into the upper grades of elementary school, he seemed to gain some discretion, and his behavior improved. From then on, Brian was quite the honor student. He had good grades and served as the president of the student council. He was also a leader in his club. His test scores never fell below 90. However, at home, Brian didn't seem to study much. When I peeked into his room, Brian was usually lying down reading manga. When I asked, "Brian, while reading manga, are you studying?" "Yeah," he would always say. Yet Brian never let his grades slip. He must have been working hard in ways I didn't know. Brian went on to a public junior high and high school. Despite his grades, he chose the public school closest to our home, though he could have gone to a prestigious private school. Even in junior high and high school, his grades were always at the top, and he was the student council president. He went to a local public university for college. In college, he seemed more devoted to activities like volunteering than to his studies. Then, when he started job hunting, Brian only applied to local companies. With his grades, he could have worked for a large corporation or a foreign company. I was puzzled why Brian chose such small companies. I asked Brian why.
"Since high school, I kind of always wanted to work locally."
Apparently, there was a class assignment about the local area in high school that sparked his interest in staying local. He chose the local university and through volunteer activities sought to deepen his understanding of our town. I hadn't realized Brian had been thinking along these lines and honestly admired it.
"That's impressive. You really thought it through."
I praised Brian. "It's not a big deal," Brian said, laughing shyly. Brian got the job he wanted at a local company and graduated from university without issue. I thought he would commute from our house, but he decided to rent an apartment near his company. Brian is very strong and likes to show his independence.
"It's all experience,"
he said. He wanted to experience living on his own and learn how difficult housework can be. Our home became quiet as if a light had gone out after Brian left. But then I remembered, this is how it was when Kevin and I first got married. I decided to enjoy living just with Kevin again. Thanks to Brian choosing public schools, we had quite a bit of savings left. The mortgage on our house was almost paid off, so it looked like we could pay it off around the time Kevin retires. Furthermore, my parents have a broad apartment management business. Eventually, it looks like I will take over the apartment management. We won't have any financial troubles in our old age. Brian's apartment was close enough that he could come and go by bicycle, so he often came home. Thanks to that, I never felt lonely. After a few years of this peaceful life, Brian said,
"I have someone I want you to meet."
It was when he was 26. Brian brought that woman home.
"Let me introduce you. This is Arya."
Brian and Arya worked at the same company, and she was in the accounting department. Hearing that, Kevin and I exchanged looks and laughed. Brian and Arya looked at us curiously. Kevin started telling our story with a laugh. Listening to us, Brian and Arya looked at each other and laughed too. Arya was petite, with eyes that drooped down when she laughed, giving her a very cute and kind impression. Arya seemed restless, looking around our home. Her actions reminded me of a little bird looking around, which was charming. Kevin and I liked Arya right away. If only we had been suspicious at that moment. The trouble that followed might have been avoided. There was a hidden reason why Arya was looking around our home. Kevin and I failed to notice it. "Nice to meet you." Arya's voice was very pleasant, and I thought Brian was lucky to have her. Arya was a good listener, and even the usually quiet Brian seemed happy talking with her. The four of us had dinner together and enjoyed a pleasant time. After Arya and Brian left, Kevin and I were relieved and happy that Brian had chosen a good partner. I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Brian and Arya's relationship progressed smoothly, and they decided to get married. They had their wedding at a local venue and were blessed by everyone. Kevin and I were so happy. That day became one of the most memorable in our lives. However, we couldn't have imagined that from here, our lives would start to spiral downwards, with misfortune hitting Kevin and me. At first, we thought it was coincidence or maybe Arya wasn't feeling well, but it didn't seem to be the case. Her attitude towards me got worse day by day. When I tried to discuss what to have for dinner with Arya, at first, she pretended not to hear. The next thing she would say was usually, "What?" in an annoyed tone. I was taken aback by Arya's attitude. "I was wondering what to have for dinner." Arya's replies were always cold. "Oh, whatever is fine. Harper, you decide." The atmosphere wasn't conducive to discussion at all. Arya's attitude had clearly changed since we first met. And it was only towards me. Instead of getting angry, I was more confused. I didn't want to ruin my relationship with Arya, so I ended up being more submissive than necessary. "Then how about beef stew for dinner today?" Arya replied with an air of inconvenience. "That's fine, I guess," and cut off the conversation with me. I immediately started preparing the beef stew. Then Arya, without offering to help, would always mutter to herself with comments like, "What about the ingredients, the spices?" I ignored her words and silently continued cooking. While cooking, I wondered if I had done something terrible to Arya. But I couldn't think of anything. Did I say something unpleasant to her? Did I do something to offend her? I tried desperately to remember. But nothing came to mind. Honestly, I had no idea why she was acting this way. Arya's attitude didn't improve after that. Every time Arya treated me badly, I wondered if I had done something to her. However, I couldn't understand why Arya was treating me so badly. I felt like the reason for Arya's change in attitude wasn't me, but something else. This was just a feeling, without any certainty. A year passed, and Arya's attitude towards me remained unchanged. In fact, it got even worse. "Harper, this food looks disgusting." Arya began to openly criticize my cooking. Unlike before, she now blatantly insulted it. "Doesn't the seasoning seem too strong, and doesn't it look unappetizing?" I couldn't help but talk back. "We always eat this at home." Arya responded to my words with a mocking laugh. "Is that so that's lame?" I was honestly quite irritated by Arya's attitude. "If you're going to complain that much, next time you can cook by yourself." "Scary! Harper, you're scary!" Arya exaggerated her fear in a loud voice. Probably so that Kevin and Brian in the living room could hear. I was scared of this calculating side of Arya. Anyway, Arya's attitude was only visible when it was just the two of us. She kept making provocative comments to me. I thought many times about discussing it with Kevin or Brian. But I just couldn't bring myself to do it. Arya was very devoted to Kevin. She also got along well with Brian. So I thought I just had to endure it. I didn't want to ruin the relationship. "Tonight's dinner is a gillo made by Harper." Arya served the dish with a huge smile. Knowing the Arya from the kitchen, all I could do was give a wry smile. Kevin sat down, saying, "That looks delicious." Brian also smiled. "Harper can cook delicious meals, and she's good at laundry and cleaning. I really admire her." Arya turned to me with a smile. Honestly, I felt sick. "Harper, you're really amazing." The two who didn't know the face Arya hid behind her smile looked at her fondly. "Thank you." I returned a smile as if to keep up appearances. Anyone who didn't know would notice my expression was forced. If they saw Arya's smile, they wouldn't think she treated me badly. I feared being called a liar by Kevin and Brian. I thought if I kept enduring without consulting anyone, Arya's attitude might change. However, Arya's harsh words and attitude towards me never ceased. Arya continued to complain about the food I made. But she never did anything herself. And the cleanup too. And she would quickly complain about anything even slightly dissatisfying. One day, Arya threw unbearable words at me. "Harper, are you sane with that seasoning?" I couldn't endure it and snapped back at her.
Do you have a problem?
Arya pretended to be shocked as usual.
No, I don't. Scary.
What do you mean by that? Stop belittling me already. Arya seemed slightly taken aback by my earnest gaze. I'm not belittling you, she muttered, biting her lip and glaring at me. It's always truly unpleasant with you, I continued.
Shut up. A woman like you.
It was as if Arya's mask had slipped. Her face contorted uglily all of a sudden.
Being treated roughly is just about right for you.
Arya continued to berate me. Towards me, Arya said,
You're really pathetic. Ugly face and nasty personality. The idea of you being a MIL is unbelievable.
Her insults were relentless. To belittle me to this extent must mean she really dislikes me. But still, I can't understand how she can say such horrible things to someone she dislikes. If she dislikes me that much, I think she should just stay away and keep her distance. I felt sad. It's sad that you think that way. Arya raised her voice in a semblance of panic.
No, I really can't take this anymore. Hey, are you okay?
Kevin called out from the living room. Arya's loud voice had reached the living room. I heard a loud voice. Brian came into the kitchen. Brian came from the living room to check on Arya and me arguing. Seeing Brian's face, Arya seemed to regain her composure. Sorry, there was a cockroach. I went along with Arya's act.
Yes, that's right. Sorry for making a fuss,
Arya said. We've dealt with the cockroach, so it's fine now. And pushed Brian back towards the living room. Brian said, Okay, and went back to the living room. Neither Arya nor I wanted to involve Brian and Kevin. This was a problem between Arya and me. Our relationship did not change after that. An unpleasant atmosphere continued to linger between us. However, about half a year later, happy news came to Brian's family. Brian and Arya were expecting a child. I hoped this would change my relationship with Arya. Arya, being cautious with her pregnancy, reduced her visits to our home. For a while, I regained a peaceful daily life. During Arya's absence, I kept thinking about why she changed her attitude towards me. I could think of nothing. There was one thing that bothered me, but could that really be the reason for her attitude? Dismissing it as impossible, I shook my head and went shopping. When Arya entered her stable period, Arya and Brian came to visit our house. I thought that having a child would calm Arya down. But that was wishful thinking. Upon seeing me, Arya resumed her terrible attitude. Different from Harper, it's growing well, I told Arya. Take care of yourself and rest on the sofa. But Arya showered me with harsh words. No thanks. Who knows what you'd cook if I left it to you? Furthermore, I need to keep an eye on you, Arya said. What does she mean by keep an eye? So, this is how Arya sees me. You can talk back, but I'm fine with anything said by you who could only have one child. I responded calmly. Oh, is that so? But inside, I was far from calm. I felt guilty for not being able to give Brian siblings. I harbored a sense of apology towards Brian in my heart. I poured love into Brian and had more time to engage with him. Kevin and I were able to lead a relaxed life. I had no regrets about that. As I fell silent, Arya continued to taunt me.
That reaction can't even talk back.
Pathetic. I didn't understand what Arya wanted or why she was doing this. Feeling it was futile to engage any further, I ignored Arya. A few months later, Brian and Arya's healthy baby girl was born. For Kevin and me, she was our first granddaughter. We were incredibly happy. We eagerly awaited the day we could meet our first granddaughter. I hoped that having a child would improve my relationship with Arya. With my experience in parenting, I thought I could offer Arya plenty of advice. But my hopes were not fulfilled. This became clear at the first granddaughter's unveiling party. The truth behind Arya's actions towards me was also revealed. A week after Arya and the baby were discharged from the hospital, Kevin and I rushed to Brian's apartment with gifts for the birth celebration. We brought loads of presents for our granddaughter, including swaddles, a baby carrier, diapers, and formula. Arya looked a bit worn but appeared healthy. I was bothered by her cold gaze when she saw me, but I was too eager to see my granddaughter to care. The first granddaughter was sleeping in her crib. The thought of Brian becoming a dad was deeply moving. Brian seemed to have taken on a more mature look. I laid out the groceries I had bought on the table. Thinking they wouldn't have had proper meals just after the birth, I had bought plenty of ready-made food for Brian and Arya. As I was about to start preparing in the kitchen,
"Please sit down, I'll take care of it,"
Arya said. "You don't have to push yourself," I replied, but Arya insisted and pushed me down into a chair.
"It's okay."
I sat down, feeling overwhelmed by Arya's insistent behavior. Arya plated the ready-made food and served it in front of Kevin and Brian.
"Please eat."
I thought my portion would come next, but Arya placed only one plate on the table. Not in front of me, but at her own seat. I had a bad feeling but remained silent.
"Oh dear, I forgot Harper's portion."
Kevin and Brian laughed. It seemed I was the only one with a bad premonition. But Kevin and Brian were soon frozen by Arya's next action. Arya placed instant ramen in front of me.
"There's only enough for the family."
I couldn't understand what Arya was saying. As I sat there stunned, Arya added insult to injury with a laugh.
"You're not family. You're a stranger. Isn't that obvious?"
I didn't understand what she meant by not being family. I realized Arya's feelings towards me hadn't changed from before. Then Kevin stood up.
"Shall we go?"
With just those words, Kevin headed towards the entrance. Yes. I also stood up and followed Kevin. In the apartment lobby, I apologized to Kevin.
"I'm sorry for what happened."
Kevin looked at me with a gentle smile.
"It's Arya who's in the wrong. What happened?"
I told Kevin everything, like a dam bursting. About how Arya suddenly changed her attitude towards me. And pretended to be friendly in front of Kevin and Brian. Kevin looked into my eyes and nodded slowly. I asked Kevin why he believed everything I said.
"Well, I never imagined Arya would do such a thing."
If I were in Kevin's position, I would think the same. Arya had been very cunning.
"Harper, you wouldn't lie, especially not to speak ill of someone."
Kevin trusted me. I was really touched by that. Kevin muttered to himself as if talking to himself.
"It would be unthinkable for me, her husband, not to believe Harper."
Tears welled up in my eyes. Kevin handed me a handkerchief with a laugh.
"I'm also to blame for not realizing it sooner."
It couldn't be helped. I had kept it all hidden.
"I'm really sorry."
Kevin's words made me cry uncontrollably.
Don't worry about anything. I'm here for you.
Through tears.
Thank you,
I said. How dependable Kevin was. I was moved by Kevin's kindness. As we were about to leave the apartment lobby, my phone rang. It was from Brian. Feeling guilty for ruining the celebration of our first granddaughter, I answered the call. Brian's call.
I want to have a proper discussion, so please come back.
A proper talk. He wanted to apologize for Arya's rudeness and mentioned that Arya had been acting strangely. After consulting with Kevin, we decided to go back. Brian welcomed us at the entrance and led us to the nursery, which was already set up with a study desk and bed. I couldn't help but laugh at how prepared they were. I'm really sorry about Arya. Has there been trouble for a while? Brian seemed to have noticed something.
That time in the kitchen when there was a loud voice, you were arguing, weren't you?
Right, we had lied about seeing a cockroach. Brian had known all along. I explained to Brian how Arya's attitude changed towards me shortly after their marriage. Brian was silent, but his fists were clenched tightly.
I'm really sorry.
Brian believed what I said. I thought Brian might defend Arya and call my story a lie. Tears came to my eyes again.
I've decided to divorce Arya.
Kevin and I were shocked and speechless.
Why?
I managed to say just one word. Kevin nodded in agreement. Brian said as he left the room and headed for the living room.
I'll explain everything now.
Kevin and I followed him. From the living room came Arya's crying and
No!
A scream. The divorce papers were on the dining table. I didn't miss Brian's signature on them. When Arya saw my face, she threw magazines and ornaments she had in her hand at me. One nearly hit me. Then, Kevin shielded me, and a small ornament hit Kevin's face. Kevin's glasses flew off in a wrong direction. Arya probably didn't expect it to hit. She stopped moving, eyes wide open. I was shocked and saw blood flowing from near Kevin's temple. Brian approached Arya with an incredibly stern look, holding her hands down.
Do you realize what you've done?
Brian exclaimed in a tone I had never heard from him before. Arya collapsed on the spot as if her legs gave out.
It's not my fault. I'm not the bad one. It's her.
Arya was muttering the same words over and over, looking dazed. Brian looked at me sadly.
Right after we got married, Arya visited Mom, remember?
I tried to recall when that was. Then it hit me. I finally understood the discomfort I felt back then. Yes, Arya visited me alone. She had asked me for a loan at that time. Brian was unaware of this loan. So,
first, talk to Brian about it,
I said. At that time. Understood. Arya quickly agreed and went back home. Since she never consulted me about it again, I assumed it was resolved. This was a secret I kept to myself, so Kevin didn't know. Kevin looked at me, surprised. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I felt sorry for Arya and didn't say anything.
That's what I hate, your pretense of being good.
Suddenly, Arya hurled insults at me. Quite a vulgar way to speak.
About that loan, Arya borrowed from somewhere else and repaid it.
Brian also told me about Arya's spending habits. Arya has always been extravagant with money. She prefers expensive ingredients and loves brands. Even when Brian met Arya, she was in debt. Brian had a talk with Arya not to borrow any more money. Unless she agreed, he couldn't continue the relationship, and Arya consented. At that time, Arya was crying and apologizing. Brian looked down at Arya sadly.
Anyway, I'm definitely not in the wrong. It's her fault.
Arya insisted she was not to blame, but her words lacked any conviction. Brian and Kevin looked at Arya with cold eyes.
Shut up! Just shut up! Shut up!
Arya began to cry and scream as if she had a tantrum. We couldn't handle her anymore and kept our distance. When Arya was about to smash a ceramic ornament on the floor, the baby in the crib started crying. I rushed to soothe the baby. When Arya yelled,
Shut up! Why is this kid crying?
We were shocked and looked at Arya.
Everyone's just getting in my way. Shut up!
The baby cried louder as if Arya's yelling set it off. I tried to calm the baby, but it wouldn't stop crying.
Ah, so annoying. Make that child stop crying now.
Was this the real Arya? Her way of speaking remained vulgar. Those eyes were not sane. She seemed to have lost her mind. Concerned for the baby's safety, I decided to take the baby to the nursery.
Where are you taking him? Because I don't know what you might do.
Arya was yelling to let go of the baby.
Arya, put down that ornament in your hand first.
Arya looked at the ceramic she was holding up.
Is it okay to show that to the baby?
Kevin's calm words seemed to bring Arya back to her senses. She quietly put down the ornament and covered her face with both hands. Arya started crying loudly. In the end, Kevin and I decided to take care of the baby that day. We left Brian and Arya to talk things over slowly. The next day, Brian came to our house. Brian looked haggard but somehow refreshed. In the living room, Kevin and I heard the story from Brian. It was a dreadful one. Yesterday's story was about Arya's terrible spending habits. Despite Brian's persuasion, her spending habits did not improve. In fact, they had gotten worse. Arya, who had been borrowing money from everywhere, had set her sights on our assets. When I heard this, I understood why Arya had looked around our house when she first came. She was checking if there was anything valuable in the house, whether we were wealthy. Then she tried to extract money from me. However, she seemed to have borne a grudge after being refused. That's why she started treating me harshly. I shivered in fear. It wasn't that I was mean and refused to lend her money, I just wanted them to discuss it as a couple first. Arya took it the wrong way. But Brian's story didn't end there. Arya had been acting strange lately, so Brian had hired a detective to investigate. As a result, Arya's affair was discovered. Moreover, Arya was conspiring with that man to steal Kevin's life insurance money. I was shocked.
How could it be?
Brian nodded silently.
They were planning to make it look like an accident.
Brian continued the story with difficulty. Arya was tormenting me, trying to drive me out of the house. She planned to get rid of Kevin once I was out. What a thing to do. Arya had such a terrifying plan. I shivered and hugged myself. Brian had decided to divorce after receiving the report. He was about to discuss it when this incident happened. Brian said he was going to report it to the police.
We can't stay silent about this.
Indeed, if left unresolved, Arya might repeat her actions. She would take it for granted and do the same or worse. Arya should be properly dealt with, Brian said. Kevin agreed. I told Brian it was for the best too. Brian reported to the police, and Arya was arrested. Since she was trying to fraudulently claim the insurance money, it was natural she was caught. Arya's diary specifically detailed how to obtain the insurance money. Brian and Arya's divorce was finalized while Arya was in custody. Arya seemed to have claimed custody, but naturally, it went to Brian. Even the lawyers were appalled by Arya's claim to custody. If Arya is prosecuted, she and her co-conspirator will likely receive actual prison sentences. I want Arya to reflect deeply and face her crimes in prison. Not only did she ruin Brian's life, but she also caused great trouble for the child born into this mess. The assault on Kevin did not become a case because Kevin did not file a complaint. That was typical of Kevin's kindness. With Arya gone, peace has returned to my heart. I sleep well at night, and my heart doesn't race when I visit Brian's house. Life with just Kevin and me has been peaceful. The times Arya stirred up trouble seem like a lie to me now. Brian and the grandchild live together. Fortunately, Kevin and I live nearby. We help with everything from childcare center drop-offs and pickups to meals. Above all, being able to watch the grandchild grow up close is a joy. If things continue this way, Kevin and I might see the grandchild's coming-of-age ceremony. The grandchild was a baby, so he doesn't remember mom. It might be sad, but it's probably better that such a mom isn't around. Besides, it seems Brian has a girlfriend. The grandchild whispered it to me as a secret. I'm looking forward to Brian introducing the woman he wants to introduce. There's only enough for the family.
Finally, the nuisance is gone. From today, we're living with my parents at my house.
Matthew's words hung in the air as I stood dumbfounded in front of our demolished family home, right after my parents had passed away.
What are you talking about? Have you lost your mind too? Hurry up and bring the inheritance over to my place.
I couldn't help but burst into laughter at his words. I see. So that's what this was about.
What? Why are you laughing? You guys don't know?
Know what? As I laughed, Matthew and the in-laws looked at me quizzically. It was then that I decided to tell them the truth. My name is Madison. I was born the eldest daughter in a family of ordinary full-time working parents. I have one older brother. A perfectly normal family. At 29, I married my husband Matthew, and we had 2 children. Juggling work and child-rearing, before I knew it, I was already 55. Our son, Kenneth, and our daughter, Amelia, had grown up and become respectable members of society. They were both living on their own, struggling with their new careers. Now it was time for Matthew and me to enjoy some peace. It was a plain life, but a happy one. I had always thought we would continue to age together like this. But then, one winter day, everything changed. Dad was in a traffic accident and passed away suddenly. He was only 72 at the time. Our family was engulfed in sorrow, especially since Dad had been so healthy. Mom was particularly devastated, hardly able to eat.
Mom, I know you're sad, but you have to eat.
I kept telling Mom this over and over.
I know, but I just don't have an appetite. It feels like there's a lump in my chest.
My brother and I thought Mom was just going through a rough emotional patch, so we watched her for a while. But then, Mom's weight started to drop rapidly in just half a month. Worried, I decided to take her to the hospital.
What? Cancer?
I was stunned when the doctor diagnosed Mom with cancer. It was advanced and inoperable, and she only had about a year left. I hadn't been able to do enough for my parents yet. Just when I thought we had only lost Dad, now Mom was going through this. I was even more devastated than when Dad passed away. But there was no time to stay sad forever. My brother lived far away and couldn't be relied upon. So, it was up to me to help Mom. I immediately told Matthew that I wanted to live with Mom. I couldn't leave Mom alone, both emotionally and physically, in her illness. But Matthew's reaction was not what I expected.
What? We just finished the funeral, and now I have to deal with your parents again?
Matthew said this with a sigh, sounding annoyed.
You don't have to say it like that. Isn't it enough to just drive her to and from the hospital? Why do we have to live together? I think she'll feel lonely. If it's not okay, maybe I can live at my parents' house for a while?
I suggested. Then, Matthew said indignantly.
What? And who's going to take care of my meals then? I'll come over to cook, of course. What about cleaning? Laundry? Who's going to do all that?
I was rendered speechless. I intended to do what I could, but I couldn't handle everything as usual. His pointed remarks hurt. I couldn't argue back if someone said that my desire to help and nurse Mom was just my selfishness. I knew Mom would probably hesitate and insist that everything should stay the same. But I desperately wanted to show my filial piety.
Fine, but I'm not helping with anything, understand?
Matthew grudgingly said this to me, who was silent. Although his attitude was arrogant, he had ultimately given in. I'm sorry, and thank you. Even though I thought he was being quite terrible, he had agreed to my request. I held back my desire to retort and expressed my gratitude. Despite the disagreement, Matthew and I started living with Mom at my parents' home. We had been living in company housing provided by Matthew's company. Matthew was an only child. Thomas had expressed a desire to live together, so there were no plans to buy a home, and eventually, we were supposed to live in the in-laws' house. While he was still working, the company housing was more convenient for commuting, and the rent was only about $300 a month, not a significant burden. However, moving to my parents' house eliminated that expense, and the house was more spacious. I think living together wasn't all downsides for Matthew. As he had declared, Matthew didn't help with anything, but I was happy to be able to live with Mom. Mom seemed energetic, but she often felt weak and spent a lot of time lying down during the day. I prepare meals for Mom and make sure she eats them. I also arrange her medication. Doing all this alone would have been impossible for Mom. I'm sorry, Madison. Thank you. It's a big help to have you here. I should thank Matthew too. Mom expressed her gratitude to us many times. I hadn't told her about the harsh words Matthew had said when we decided to live together, so she seemed grateful to him as well. One evening, after Mom had gone to bed and Matthew had come home, I served him dinner and said, "About Mom's treatment." But Matthew glared at me and said, "Don't tell me about it. I don't want to hear it. I told you I'm not helping." And refused to listen. I too wanted to vent or seek advice from someone. All I wanted was for Matthew to just listen. Matthew's attitude didn't change, not after a month, nor after 2. He complained about living with my mother, acting as if he was doing a great favor by agreeing to it. His behavior became increasingly arrogant and dismissive day by day. But I couldn't really say anything in response. The stress of worrying about Mom and being considerate of Matthew was building up. Around the time when a year had passed since Mom's terminal diagnosis, her health rapidly deteriorated, and she was hospitalized. 3 days later, she passed away. Despite being mentally prepared, I was deeply saddened. My brother's family and my children rushed to support me, but in times like these, you really want your spouse by your side. However, Matthew just laughed and chatted with the in-laws in a corner, not helping with the funeral at all. My brother took on the role of the chief mourner, and we somehow managed to prepare for the funeral. But Matthew sat at the very back of the relative seats when he should be seated at the bereaved family seats.
"Matthew, I'd like you to sit in the bereaved family seats."
When I said this, Matthew replied, "No, I'm fine here. I'm not a blood relative after all."
"But you are my husband."
Then Addison, who was listening to our conversation, chimed in.
"He may be your husband, but he's not your mom's son, right?"
"Matthew is my son, so he's an outsider."
"That's right. We're Matthew's only parents. You can sit in the bereaved family seats, Madison."
Hearing the in-laws say this, I fell silent. While traditions may vary by region, in our area, it's customary for sons-in-law to sit in the bereaved family seats. As expected, when relatives noticed Matthew wasn't in the bereaved family seats, I overheard whispers like, "Did they get divorced?" It was embarrassing, and while those gossiping were at fault too, it would have been resolved if Matthew had just sat there. I felt a bit resentful that Matthew wasn't by my side, but we managed to give Mom a proper send-off. After the funeral, we returned home with my brother's family, my children, Matthew, and the in-laws.
Thomas, Addison, thank you for coming during this busy time.
I expressed my gratitude to the in-laws and served them coffee. Then, they said, laughing, "Really though?
First your father passed away, and now your mother. It's been quite costly for us too. But at least it's over now."
I was stunned by their words. How could they say such things? I couldn't believe what they were saying. I forced a smile and left the room, trying my best to keep my composure. Then, as I walked away, I could hear the conversation between the in-laws and Matthew behind me.
"Matthew, it must have been hard for you, living with someone else's family." "Yeah, Madison's stubbornness was quite a challenge. You shouldn't always give in to your wife. It's okay to say no in a marriage."
I clenched my fist. Their voices, chatting and laughing, filled me with anger and frustration, but this wasn't new. The in-laws had always been insensitive and rude. When I married Matthew,
"Couldn't you have found someone more attractive?" "I worry about the grandkids' looks,"
Addison declared.
"They say beauty bores you after 3 days. With Madison, that's unlikely to happen,"
he said. Matthew laughed at these rude comments. It was a pattern with this family. Something in me snapped. I realized that neither the in-laws nor Matthew had ever said a word of comfort to me, not during Dad's funeral, nor after Mom passed. Instead, they mocked me. Matthew's behavior and attitude as a person started to raise questions in my mind. I thought I had been too considerate towards Matthew when all I wanted was to do something for Mom. If Matthew had been supportive towards me, it would be one thing. But he wasn't, and there was absolutely no reason for me to feel so guilty towards him. My growing anger was overshadowed by the ongoing laughter and chit-chat of the in-laws and Matthew in the background. If my brother's family or the kids had overheard them, they would have been upset, but luckily, they were all in the kitchen. I was the only one who heard their conversation since I was in a different room, which was a relief. As I was contemplating all this, Addison's voice once again reached my ears.
"Madison."
"Yes?" I turned to respond.
"Can I take this?"
Addison was holding Mom's handbag. I was perplexed, not understanding what was meant by that. Addison responded to me, saying,
"Your mom can't use it anymore, right? Matthew said it's okay to take it."
Addison was examining the bag as if appraising it. It was so disrespectful, especially right after the funeral. I took the bag away. "No, you can't."
"Huh?"
Her expression changed, showing not just anger about having the bag taken away, but also that I, her daughter-in-law, had dared to stand up to her. Despite the intensity of her expression, I stood my ground and responded with equal determination.
"We're not ready to go through Mom's belongings yet. We'll divide her things among family members later."
Addison was furious.
"What? Are you saying I'm an outsider? Didn't you just say at the funeral that even Matthew was an outsider? How does that make you family?"
I couldn't help but retort. Hearing my words, Matthew and Thomas also turned red.
"What are you saying? Apologize to Mom. How rude for a wife to say such things."
Hearing the commotion, everyone else came from the other room.
"After all the effort we put in, attending the funeral and cremation, to be called an outsider. Let's go, Thomas."
Addison yelled at me in front of everyone and left our house. Matthew, too, angrily left with the in-laws. "What happened? Did you really say they were outsiders to Mom?" Everyone, having heard only Addison's words, said that to me. Indeed, if only that part of the conversation was considered, it might sound like I was the one being unreasonable. However, I explained the entire situation to everyone. Not a single person blamed me.
"Grandma and Grandpa should have been more considerate. Dad's just the same. They've always been like that."
My kids stood by me, but I couldn't forgive those three. Matthew didn't come home for a while. And I didn't contact him. I felt it wasn't right for me to apologize, and I wasn't ready to forgive. However, I knew I couldn't stay like this forever. One day, as I was pondering this, Matthew came home.
Welcome back.
Seeing his face reignited my anger, but I suppressed it and greeted Matthew. Then, Matthew said,
It's been tough, hasn't it?
His awkward attempt at consolation surprised me.
Take the kids on a trip. It'll be a good change of pace.
He handed me travel vouchers. I was speechless. And tears welled up. Maybe the kids had influenced him. But I was happy he went along with it. I immediately contacted my children to plan the trip.
Dad did?
That's unusual. They were surprised by my suggestion. It seemed to be genuinely from Matthew.
I wonder if Dad feels sorry,
I said, smiling. And so, I gratefully accepted the trip offered by Matthew. I'll be going then.
Sure. Take it easy. Why not stay at the kids' places while you're at it?
Really? I can't be away that long.
It's fine. I'll relax at my parents' house, so don't worry about me.
Matthew said this as he saw me off. Amelia was happy to have me visit, so before the trip, I went to Amelia's and then Kenneth's place. Since I hadn't been able to visit them while caring for Mom, I helped them a bit with household chores, like preparing some meals for them to freeze.
Mom, you're not really resting, are you? But it's a big help. Thank you.
Both of them were delighted to have my home-cooked meals. This was all thanks to Matthew's suggestion. Then came the long-awaited trip. I spent a relaxing time with my children at our destination. It seemed to heal the fatigue from caregiving and the sorrow of losing my parents. Although I was away for almost a week, both children returned to their homes with bright smiles.
It was fun. We should thank Dad once in a while.
Yeah, once in a while. But I wonder if he's up to something? Amelia said this with a joking tone.
Don't say that. Dad thought about it in his own way.
I laughed along with them. I planned to return home and share all these memories with Matthew, looking forward to a happy life together as a couple. But when I arrived home, I was speechless.
What's going on? Where's the house?
I looked around in disbelief, confirming my location. Despite being in a familiar place, my parents' house was gone. Then, Matthew appeared out of nowhere. The in-laws were behind him. They were wearing smug smiles, while I could only stand there.
Matthew, what's happening?
I asked Matthew, bewildered. Matthew, with a similarly unsettling smile as the in-laws, said,
Finally, the nuisance is gone. Now, it's time to live with my parents at my house. What are you talking about?
I replied calmly to Matthew's arrogant statement. Then, Matthew continued.
Have you lost your mind too? Your family home has been demolished. Hurry up and bring your inheritance to my place. Whatever you inherited is ours now.
I realized then. The reason our house was gone was Matthew's doing, and it was all for the inheritance. Despite having thought about the future on my way home, what a betrayal it was. I was overwhelmed with frustration and sadness. But even if they went to the lengths of demolishing the house, they wouldn't get their way. I wouldn't let them. I burst into laughter at the faces of the three, who were still sporting their smug smiles. My laughter seemed to confuse Thomas and Matthew, leaving them looking bewildered.
What? Why are you laughing? What a weird woman. Has she gone crazy?
Addison looked at me as if I were something bizarre. I faced the three of them and said,
You guys don't know?
Know what? I then told Matthew.
I didn't inherit anything at all. So there's no inheritance.
I started laughing again after saying this. They must have mistakenly thought they would become rich from the inheritance. Their baseless assumptions and actions were so ludicrous, I couldn't stop laughing.
What do you mean? Explain yourself.
Matthew demanded an explanation. But I chose to remain silent. I saw no need to enlighten them. Before that, let me say this. I won't live with strangers. If you want to live together, do it on your own. Instead of answering Matthew's question and refusing his initial proposal, Addison erupted in anger.
You helped your own parents with their housework, but you can't help us? You do understand there was a reason for that, right? I agreed to live together, didn't I? I said it wasn't necessary for us to live together. Have you forgotten that you chose to live together just to avoid housework?
Matthew and Addison bit their lips as I countered their arguments.
And demolishing my family home without permission, there are things you just don't do.
I reprimanded the three of them. And then left the place. Behind me, Matthew called out.
Where are you going?
His voice rang out. But I didn't turn back. I needed to find a place to sleep for the night, and I really didn't want to see Matthew's face. I immediately consulted a lawyer. It's not that easy to just demolish a house. The house was still in Mom's name. As I wondered which company had taken on the demolition, an unbelievable truth came to light. Matthew and Thomas had directly demolished the house themselves. Thomas had asked a friend who worked at a demolition heavy machinery, even rented heavy machinery. It was all meticulously planned. Moreover, they had given me the travel vouchers to get rid of me. I felt pathetic for being so easily deceived and was incredibly angry.
Is there any way to punish these three?
I asked the lawyer with tears in my eyes. The lawyer smiled kindly at me.
For demolishing a house in your mother's name without permission, Matthew can be charged with property destruction, and you can claim damages. Let's start there and get Matthew and his parents to properly apologize.
I nodded at the lawyer's words. The lawyer then immediately began the legal process. A few days later, after learning about the situation, an enraged Matthew called me.
What's this legal notice about?
Oh, you received it?
You destroyed an important house, so naturally, you need to compensate. Compensate? We told you we were moving into our family home. We demolished a house nobody was going to live in. Instead of compensation, you should be thanking us. Now, bring whatever inheritance you have and come back home.
Matthew arrogantly retorted.
Thank you for demolishing my house without permission? Don't make me laugh. And as for bringing the inheritance, there's none to bring since I didn't inherit anything.
I shouted back at him over the phone. Matthew remained silent. It seemed he was startled by my raised voice, something unusual for me who rarely shouts. The reason I laughed when the house was demolished was precisely this. I had spent a year living with Mom. It was obvious we would have discussed inheritance. I had said to Mom, I don't need anything. Give it all to my brother. So, my brother inherited everything, including the cash and securities. Instead, he had offered me the house, saying he lived far away and couldn't manage it. If I wasn't going to live there, it could be rented out. And so, I was supposed to inherit the house.
Either you and Thomas restore the family home to its original state, or pay the amount specified in the notice. This amount! I'm being generous by offering a settlement. If you can't pay, I'll file a complaint and sue you.
I spoke firmly.
Sorry. I didn't expect you to be so angry. Of course I'm angry.
Matthew started making excuses. He had thought that if my family home remained, he couldn't live with his parents. Thomas, in particular, had been hoping to live together for a long time. He took a liking to Kenneth and seemed to want to live with him. It was Matthew who refused to live together at that time, citing the difficulty of commuting, but the in-laws seemed to be under the impression that it was I who was against it, unaware of the real reason. So, they thought demolishing my family home and taking the inheritance would force me to move in with them. However, hearing this now didn't make it any more forgivable.
So, please forgive me. I didn't mean any harm. Dad is remorseful too. If you're truly remorseful, then accept the settlement.
I said this and hung up the phone. Matthew kept calling and sending messages, apologizing.
If you're sorry, then just transfer the money quickly.
I pushed Matthew away with these words. I knew the family home couldn't be restored, but demanding compensation was the only way I could process my feelings. Afterward, I stayed at Amelia's house. My brother's family and my children were aware of the situation. Even though my brother must have been angry about the house being demolished without permission.
I won't interfere, but I'll help if you need it. Do what you think is right, Madison,
he said. Everyone condemned Matthew's actions and supported me. A month passed without any payment of the deposit or damages. And there was no contact from Matthew. I couldn't rely on Amelia forever. I wanted to get the money and at least establish a stable living situation. Contrary to my wishes, something unbelievable happened. It was revealed to me through Amelia's casual remark.
This apron looks like Grandma's, doesn't it?
Amelia said this while showing me her mobile phone screen. Upon seeing the screen, I was taken aback. It was a free market app's product page. The apron that Amelia said resembled my mom's was actually a unique one I had made for her.
How can this be? That is Grandma's apron. I made it, so I'm sure of it. What?
Amelia quickly started checking other pages. The seller seemed to have recently registered, with 0 transaction counts and ratings. There were nearly 30 items listed for sale, and to my shock, all of them belonged to Mom. I immediately realized what was happening. It was Matthew's doing. He was the only one who could have taken Mom's belongings after demolishing the house. I called Matthew right away.
What's with that app?
App? Matthew responded with an air of inconvenience. Fuming, I didn't let him play ignorant.
Don't play dumb. You're selling Mom's things, aren't you? Cancel those listings right now.
Then, Matthew seemed to panic.
What? No, it's not me. Who else would do such a thing? I'm coming over to get everything back.
I hung up and immediately headed to the in-laws' house with Amelia.
Where are Mom's belongings?
As soon as we arrived at the in-laws' house, I called out for Matthew. We were met at the entrance.
I don't know anything about it. Dad, tell the truth.
Amelia backed me up, confronting Matthew. He looked troubled. As we were talking, the in-laws noticed our presence and came out.
Oh, Amelia, you're here?
Addison seemed pleased to see Amelia. But Amelia, visibly angry, confronted her.
Grandma, tell Dad to be honest. Honest about what? It seems Dad is selling Grandma's stuff that was left when she passed away.
At Amelia's words, Addison laughed. Matthew, looking troubled, furrowed his brow and repeated.
It's really not me.
Then, Addison said loudly.
Matthew is selling them? That's impossible. But. Because I'm the one selling them.
I felt as if the blood had drained from my face at her words. Matthew must have known. He looked at Addison with an expression that screamed trouble. Even as Amelia stood there in shock, Addison seemed cheerful.
What did you say? It's quite a lot of work, you know? I have to pack things carefully and take good photos for the listings.
Addison talked about the app as if it were an enjoyable hobby, seemingly oblivious to the fact she was selling stolen items. Had to restrain myself from lashing out at her.
Cancel the listings. Those items aren't yours to sell.
Amelia, now red-faced and teary, pleaded with Addison. But Addison looked displeased. What's the big deal?
I've found a fun hobby. I use what I can and sell what I can't for a little pocket money. It's good for preventing dementia. Besides, I'm the only grandma left. Amelia, you want me to stay healthy and live a long life, right?
Addison said this without any hint of remorse. Even as we appealed to her to stop, she showed no signs of regret. If talking won't work, then action is the only option. Amelia, let's go.
But.
It's fine. Let's leave. I practically dragged Amelia out of the house. And went straight to the police station. Although I hadn't intended to report the demolition of the house, theft was a different matter. I explained to the police that Mom's belongings were stolen and being sold. They acted immediately, and the free market app suspended Addison's account. At least now, no more items could be sold. On the way back from the police station, I called Matthew.
I had Addison's account suspended.
You knew about this, right? That makes you complicit.
No, I've filed a report with the police. I expect you to cooperate with the investigation.
Matthew became frantic at my words.
But we're family. Please withdraw it. Family? You still haven't paid for the damage you caused to my house, and I don't see any signs of remorse.
Matthew was troubled by my angry retort. However, I wasn't heartless. Despite everything with the in-laws, there was a history with Matthew that couldn't be ignored. Sighing, I said,
I'll wait for the money, but I won't forgive the theft. Everything must be returned. Also, Thomas looked quite ill. Has he been to the hospital? What? I'm not a monster. Just make sure he gets that message,
I said, and hung up the phone. I saw Thomas for the first time in a while. He barely spoke and looked significantly thinner than just a few months ago. His complexion was beyond pale, almost ashen. It was clear he wasn't healthy. But that family seemed oblivious. Addison focused on selling stolen goods and Matthew only putting on a brave face for me. They lacked basic empathy. The next day, Thomas called me. I expected gratitude but got the opposite.
Why are you treating me like a sick person? Planning to shove me in a hospital to get rid of me? I have to protect Addison and Matthew from you. I won't go to the hospital.
He was scolding me. Here I was, concerned about him, and this was his response.
I apologize if I overstepped. I was just worried. I'm not weak and short-lived like your parents. Don't insult me.
His words irritated me, but a few days later, he apparently felt unwell enough to visit the hospital. The diagnosis was terminal cancer. Matthew, in a panic, called me.
Dad's got terminal cancer. What am I going to do?
But I just snorted in response.
I don't want to hear it. Do you know what he said when I suggested going to the hospital? I'm not weak and short-lived like your parents.
Do as you please.
How can you be so heartless, Madison?
Who's the heartless one?
Did you ever say a kind word to my mom when she was sick? Reflect on your own actions.
I said this and hung up the phone. As expected, Thomas soon passed away. I didn't want to hold negative feelings towards someone who passed away, but I couldn't muster any tears for him, remembering all he had done and said. After his funeral, his will was discovered. The man who insisted he wasn't short-lived had everything meticulously planned.
The house goes to my grandson, Kenneth. The rest of the estate is to be split between my wife and eldest son.
I was surprised to hear Kenneth's name. Thomas had always favored Kenneth and wanted to live with him. Perhaps he hoped Kenneth would live in the house after he was gone. To Kenneth, this might have been an inconvenience.
You should renounce the inheritance.
You don't need that house. I advised Kenneth, but he was happy to receive it. The inheritance tax was a burden, and there seemed to be no benefit for Kenneth. However, he was pleased, so I decided not to interfere further. Kenneth inherited the house as per Thomas's will. Addison seemed pleased and paid the inheritance tax.
He's our heir, after all. It's only natural,
she said. Well, that's not incorrect. I was a bit downcast, feeling like I had lost Kenneth, but then something unbelievable happened.
Come to our place.
I received this message from Matthew and immediately went to the in-laws' house. There, like me once, stood Addison and Matthew, stunned in front of the house. In front of me, on the grounds of the in-laws' house, there was a truck with Matthew's name on it, along with employees. And there, right before my eyes, the in-laws' house was being demolished.
What's happening? It's my house. I can do whatever I want with it, right?
Kenneth, appearing out of nowhere, watched the demolition of the family home with satisfaction.
Kenneth, what are you doing? Stop this right now. Even if I stop them now, it's not like anyone can live here anymore. Kenneth, what have you done?
Addison and Matthew pleaded with Kenneth. but he just laughed.
Have you forgotten what Grandpa and Dad did to Mom? Kenneth. Grandma, did you apologize for what you did to Mom?
Kenneth's smile vanished, replaced by a piercing glare at Addison and Matthew. The two of them sank to their knees. The heavy machinery continued to noisily dismantle the in-laws' house. I finally felt a sense of relief. Later, Matthew finally paid the damages and the security deposit using the inherited assets. It turned out Kenneth had recovered the items Addison stole from Mom, and they were safely returned to me.
Mom, you have me and Amelia.
Don't worry. I shed tears of relief at his words. Addison and Matthew, having lost their home and with no money left, were now back in company housing. Matthew and I left the company housing. And now, returning to it with his mother, they've become the talk of the town. People are wondering what happened. I received such a message from the wife of a colleague of Matthew, who I'm on good terms with. So, I decided to tell her the whole truth, without any deception. The two of them will probably feel awkward from now on, but it's their own responsibility. Furthermore, after Matthew's resignation, the two, having lost their place to live, are now forced to economize in preparation for their new home. Occasionally, I'm considering asking my friends about how the two are faring, just for some conversation. Meanwhile, I continued to stay at Amelia's house, but then Kenneth decided to get married. He plans to build a new home. The land where the in-laws' house stood sold for a good price, which was unexpectedly beneficial.
Mom, come live with us.
Furthermore, Kenneth said that to me. His wife-to-be expressed her warm welcome to the idea, which I found very heartening. Since I couldn't stay with Amelia forever, I gratefully accepted his offer. Determined not to end up like Addison, I look forward to living happily with my new family.
Come on, swim faster or you'll drown.
From way above me, I could hear the laughter of my husband who had pushed me into the river. I had broken both my legs a month ago. There was no way I could swim. As I desperately struggled to keep from sinking in the cold water, my husband said something. Hearing that, all the patience I had been holding on to felt foolish. My name is Isabella. I'm a 26-year-old office worker. I have a husband, Joe, who is 34 and also an office worker. Though we're a few years apart, his vast life experience has been a support to me in many ways. Joe and I met at work, where he was my boss. Initially, Joe made the first move, but I was drawn to him for his competence and leadership in various situations. Our relationship smoothly progressed to marriage. Working for a company with branches nationwide, I transferred to a different branch after getting married, feeling nervous yet fulfilled in my new environment. As a dual-income couple, we shared household chores. This company is ideal for me, eager to learn everything I can here, making studying indispensable even amidst a busy schedule. Joe also worked late, which motivated me to do my best. Being in the same company, we could easily understand what the other was working on and share daily events, making conversations with Joe very enjoyable. Initially, things were going well, but at some point, when I consulted Joe about work as usual. So you've gotten to handle such tasks now. Well, do your best. He responded somewhat coldly. The Joe I knew before would listen until I was satisfied and think of solutions together. I felt a bit lonely, but wondered if I had been a burden. Joe was busy, and I was no longer a newcomer. Telling myself that I should be able to solve things on my own by now, I consulted my new boss when in real trouble and tried not to discuss work at home. Then, on payday. How much did you earn this month? Joe asked for the first time. We had agreed to contribute a fixed amount from our salaries for living expenses and bills without knowing each other's exact incomes. It was unusual for Joe to ask such a question, but seeing no reason to hide it, I showed him my payslip. Then Joe, shocked, said,
All this without overtime. Don't joke with me. When did you start earning so much?
Far from being happy about the increased household income, Joe started treating me with a hostile attitude from that day on. Looking back, I remember hearing that Joe had an unusually high pride and only liked being around people who could boost his self-esteem.
It's because I've been sharing the housework that you can earn like this. I want to get promoted too, but I've been holding back.
Joe said that and instructed me to take over all the household chores.
A wife should play a supporting role to her husband and be modest,
he said abusively. Shocked, but verbally compliant. Understood. Please focus on your work, I said, while internally taking it as a challenge to manage all the housework and still excel at my job. However, seeing me juggle work and all the household chores, Joe would say things like,
I wish you'd just break down already.
Or,
can't you clean more thoroughly? I hate it when the room doesn't look like a showroom.
I tried to brush it off, but it was undeniably stressful. Perhaps it was wrong to keep thinking about divorce every day, whether at home or work. One day on my way to work, I missed a step on the station stairs and tumbled down a long way. I don't remember falling, but it must have been a bad fall because I ended up breaking both legs. Fortunately, no one else was involved in the accident during the morning rush, but I had to be hospitalized for a while. When Joe visited the hospital, he seemed annoyed and laughed.
Lately, you've been too proud of your work success. This is your punishment.
And said,
your fractures are nothing serious, so come back home soon.
And left. After that, Joe did visit daily but only to angrily say,
the house is dirty, come back soon.
Without a word of concern for me. I explained the situation to my workplace and started working from the hospital. When Joe tried to take away the laptop, saying,
you're really greedy for money. I told you not to earn more than me.
I quickly responded,
I've already informed my boss, and I have work scheduled today. If you don't give it back, I'll have to call and say you took it.
Which made him return it with a click of his tongue, perhaps fearing it would become widely known since we work at the same company. Despite expressing how much he disliked me, Joe continued to visit my hospital room daily after work to complain. Upon finally returning home after my hospital stay, the room was extremely dirty.
I've left your work for you. You love work and housework, so you must be happy,
Joe said, but I was still in a wheelchair, unable to walk. Trying to clean what I could reach, like the desk.
Wait, you still can't stand and work? Taking too long to heal. Isn't it because you're always sitting in that wheelchair?
He criticized. I wanted to divorce him right there and then, but I couldn't move properly until my legs healed. I couldn't tell the hospital, where I had planned to have Joe take care of me post-divorce, that I wanted to be readmitted, so I endured until I fully recovered, thinking it was just a matter of patience. I told myself that overcoming this would make me stronger, and I'd divorce Joe, living each day without consulting anyone. One day, Joe's attitude changed completely.
How about we go see a movie? There's something I want to see,
he suggested. Though I felt a bit happy, the change was so drastic that it felt odd, so I replied,
it's unusual for you to suggest that. I still have chores to do, so feel free to go by yourself.
But Joe said,
actually, my boss found out about my behavior and your situation and gave me an earful. I've been a burden till now, so I want us to go together. We haven't been out recently, and I want Isabella to take a break as a token of my gratitude.
Then he asked,
what else needs to be done?
And took care of everything. It had been a while since we went out together. Though I was suspicious, Joe tends to change his attitude quickly if someone in a position of authority speaks to him. If his boss had spoken to him, maybe he truly wanted to change. With that thought, I felt slightly happy, and given how tense I'd been every day, I decided to indulge in the break and agreed to go out. He helped me into the car, and we started our drive. The cinema was relatively close, so I didn't think it would be too much of a burden for him to drive, but we kept moving away from the direction of the cinema I knew. Curiously, I asked,
"Isn't the cinema in that direction?"
Joe replied with a smile.
"The local cinema wouldn't feel special, right? I thought we'd go to a bigger one today."
Feeling reassured, I let Joe take the lead and soon fell asleep in the car, tired from the daily grind.
"We're here."
Joe's voice woke me up, and we were at a deserted river, with no cinema in sight. Confused, I asked,
"What's going on?"
Joe said,
"The weather's nice. How about we take a commemorative photo?"
and grabbed my arm tightly, trying to pull me out of the car. Suddenly frightened, I resisted, but with my legs being weak and the strength of a man being overwhelming, I was forcibly dragged out. Without being put back in my wheelchair, the pain of dragging my legs made me groan. He dragged me near a bridge, gripping my legs as if to lift me, and I felt a fear like never before.
"Stop!"
I involuntarily screamed, but with no one around to help, I felt nothing but despair at the thought of being thrown off. Then Joe, checking to make sure no one was around and annoyed, said,
"Damn it! Don't make a noise! It'll be trouble if someone calls the cops,"
and forcefully pushed me into the river. It happened in an instant. Unlike in dramas, I didn't see the face of the person pushing me or my life flash before my eyes. I just fell into the river. In an instant, not understanding what had happened, I looked up from the river, desperately asking for help from Joe while angry, but he said,
"Better swim fast or you'll drown. Don't be mad just because you fell into the river. Maybe you need a little hardship, huh?"
And then he tried to leave. I pleaded,
"Please help me. I'll do anything you say from now on."
Even though I didn't mean it, I thought it was the only way to be saved. Still, Joe said,
"You're healed, right? Swim back home,"
and laughed, then left without trying to help, drove away in his car. Desperately wanting to live, I managed to grab onto a floating log, struggling with the pain in my legs and my inability to move properly, let alone my poor swimming skills, teetering between life and death. If no one came to help. Just then,
"Are you okay? Hold on, I'm coming to help you."
a man hurried from the shore. A man with a large empty plastic bottle swam to me, gave it to me for buoyancy, and then pulled me to shore, saving me. After being urgently transported.
"Thank you, really, thank you so much,"
I said to the man, crying from gratitude.
"No problem at all. My name is Brian. I was fishing a bit away and saw a woman being forcibly taken out of a car. I was shocked and sorry I couldn't reach you before you got wet,"
he replied. Despite everything happening so quickly, from being pulled out of the car to being pushed into the river, I was grateful for his help.
"Not at all. You saved my life."
I expressed my thanks. After sharing with Brian and the doctor about Joe's usual behavior at home and what happened this time, both were outraged and immediately reported it. The next day, to witness Joe's arrest, Brian and I went home together. I was still not fully healed, so I was in a wheelchair. The police were waiting for Joe as he returned home from work. Seeing me and Brian, Joe looked between us and mockingly said,
"Did you have an affair and get in trouble with the police?"
"Your life is over." Laughing. Confused by his absurd conclusion, the police said,
"What are you talking about?" We're here to take care of you.
And handcuffed Joe. Joe, yelling, said,
What did I do? Who is this guy? Explain.
trying to grab me even as the police restrained him. Astonished, I said,
Did you forget what you did to me? Dragging me out of the car and pushing me into the river? That's a crime, isn't it?
looking straight into Joe's eyes.
But you're alive, so I don't see why I'd be arrested.
Joe retorted nonsensically. Being alive doesn't justify anything. Joe didn't apologize for anything he had done. Far from it, he insisted he was not at fault, and to me, he no longer seemed like a husband but something devoid of human compassion.
The act of throwing someone into the river, given the real possibility of death resulting from it, is considered attempted murder.
The police explained carefully. Joe had heard of fractures but never experienced one himself. Many around him had suffered fractures and seemed to live normally, so Joe perceived it as a minor injury.
I thought fractures healed quickly, and given Isabella's resilience, I assumed she'd easily climb out of the river unharmed.
Joe argued, claiming his arrest was an overreaction. He also assumed my absence from home was due to my reluctance to do housework, maintaining his innocence. Then, Brian, who had been silent till now.
All I've heard is you justifying your actions. It seems you're not concerned about Isabella's injuries. From what I witnessed, your indifference is unbelievable.
He spoke up. Joe scoffed.
You claim to have seen the scene, but there was no one there, was there? Do you have proof you were present?
To which Brian countered, showing Joe a video.
There's plenty of evidence.
Though taken from a distance, it clearly captured Joe dropping me into the river.
When I arrived, Isabella was nearly drowning, teetering on the edge of life and death. You wouldn't have seen, having left after dropping her. It's hard to tell from above, but the current was strong.
Brian continued.
From the bridge, it might have seemed deserted, but the shore had people like me fishing, or couples jogging, surprisingly many witnesses. They all provided evidence for Isabella.
Brian proudly showed Joe the videos. Joe's face visibly paled as if in a cartoon.
This was taken by another couple. As someone with a loved one, I find this unforgivable. They insisted you must pay for your actions.
Brian silenced Joe. Frustrated and unable to retort, Joe could only glare at us. Seeing him, I said, "Showing this in court will certainly demonstrate the malice in your actions." Finally conceding. I'm sorry. Joe apologized. He pleaded, "Please, I have a job. Spare me the arrest and the trial." But I realized his apology was only out of fear of his company finding out. Unforgiven, we proceeded to trial. Upon hearing of the trial, Joe protested.
I apologized. What more do you want? I'll fight this in court. I won't let you have her way.
His outcry didn't deter me. I was determined to see the trial through. With decisive evidence in hand and Brian's support, I was able to calmly face Joe to the end. Joe insisted that fractures were minor injuries that everyone around him recovered from easily, attempting to depict me as lazy, but no one was swayed. I had been discharged from the hospital to continue rehabilitation at home, as explained by the doctor, not because I was fully healed. Joe's attempt to diagnose me without medical expertise only garnered sympathy for me from everyone present. The judge, after viewing the evidence I brought, handed down a swift prison sentence without probation to Joe, citing the maliciousness of his actions. Even after the verdict, Joe refused to give up.
The judge and police are all deceived. Is she even really fractured? If so, her suffering seems like an act.
And
Stop this nonsense and just obey me like before. What happened to you, Isabella?
he ranted. To which I quietly responded, the one who is wrong here is you. Joe's continued slander worsened the judge's impression, extending his sentence, as he inflicted more pain upon himself through his actions. Finally, everything ended, and I was free from Joe through divorce, feeling both exhausted and relieved. The more I put effort into my work, the more Joe used to get angry in the past. But now, I can focus entirely on what I want. It's as if Joe never existed. I concentrate on what's in front of me and steadily build my career. Fortunately, my workplace had no one who undermined others' character. And the depressive state Joe's attitude had induced in me gradually improved, allowing me to reclaim my former self. I also moved out of the cramped house I had lived in, enjoying a more elegant lifestyle, managing household chores and indulging in my interests as if reclaiming my lost time. Life is good now. Maybe marriage isn't for me for a while, I mused, noticing Brian looking at me sadly. The person I am today exists thanks to Brian, who saved me when I was drowning in the river. He was there for me, exhausted in both body and mind, after the trial ended and the divorce was finalized. He accompanied me during my hospital stay and my first trial, which is why I desperately wanted to express my gratitude by inviting him out for a meal on my treat today. Yet, considering Brian's busy daily schedule, I felt it wouldn't be right to invite him out too frequently, so I decided this would be a one-time gesture. Expecting the conversation to remain formal, I was surprised how well we got along, realizing hours had passed. I looked at the watch and realized, sorry for taking up your valuable time. Let's call it a day. I had fun. Thank you, I said, preparing to leave, but Brian asked,
Can I invite you out again sometime?
With a smile. Relieved he had enjoyed himself, we parted ways. Following Brian's invitation, we grew closer through multiple meetings, eventually dating and, surprisingly, marrying. Despite my initial apprehensions about a second marriage, Brian proved to be the ideal partner, supporting my career without jealousy or interference, enhancing my performance. Our relationship, built on mutual respect, allowed us to lead vibrant lives. Brian's hobby of fishing became a shared interest, helping me overcome my trauma of nearly drowning. Thanks to Brian's kindness, I've been able to live freely and happily.
You can't even show your grandparents' face, you unfilial person.
With that, my sister looked at me triumphantly. It's been 5 years since I got married, and while taking care of my father at my parents' home, I've been undergoing fertility treatments. My sister got married and was blessed with a child within 6 months. 2 months into her pregnancy, she returned to our parents' home for the birth. When I point out that my sister does nothing around the house, she coldly snaps back at me.
Since you're useless because you can't have children, at least be useful to me.
My name is Johanna. I'm 35 years old. I live with my husband Andrew and my sister Camilla, taking care of our father, Richard. Andrew and I got married 5 years ago, and we've been struggling to have children, currently undergoing fertility treatments. Camilla also got married and lives in a condominium with her husband, William, who is often away on business trips, leaving her alone at home a lot. Claiming it was for early birth preparation, she moved in with us, where Richard and my husband and I live, 2 months into her pregnancy. Our mother passed away early from illness, so Richard raised Camilla and me by himself. However, Camilla has always been troublesome, causing problems ever since she was a child. In elementary school, she would hit other kids, and Richard was often called to the school to apologize. We hoped she would calm down as she grew older, but that never happened, she kept causing problems until she graduated high school, constantly troubling Richard. Richard had to go around apologizing to people, paying for damages, and was always exhausted from cleaning up after Camilla. Feeling sorry for Richard, I helped around the house as much as I could, cooking and doing laundry, so that he could have a bit of rest. Putting ourselves last, Richard devoted himself to raising us. I wanted to ease Richard's burden, so I studied whenever I had the chance. My hard work paid off, and I was able to attend a prestigious university and land a job at a major company. Now, I work remotely while taking care of Richard. Camilla, who moved in with us a month ago, does not do any housework and doesn't care for Richard, despite the trouble she caused him. Instead, she says, "Hey, big sis, isn't today's dinner too plain? I'm pregnant, so I need nutrition. Make a more luxurious dinner tonight. Oh, and polish my shoes before I go out." She treats me like a housekeeper, ordering me around. My sister, having become pregnant before me, thinks she has the upper hand.
Why don't you take care of your own things for once?
I was stressed out by Camilla's inactivity. Lying on the living room sofa, she glared at me.
You can't even show your grandparents' face, you unfilial person.
She sneered.
What a thing to say!
I would have children if I could. But that's not possible for me. Filled with frustration, I looked down. Seeing my distress, she added insult to injury.
Since you're useless because you can't have children, at least be useful to me.
Camilla snapped coldly. Tears welled up, and I was left speechless, so I left the room. I went to my bedroom and cried into my pillow. Yet, I kept telling Camilla every day that it's better for her and the baby if she moved a bit, and to take care of herself. One day, perhaps in a bad mood.
Enough, you're so annoying. Can't you just leave the house? Just come here for Dad's care and the chores.
She blurted out something outrageous.
If you dislike me that much, why don't you go back home?
To which she replied,
Going back home would just increase my workload. What do you think I'm here for? You're the housekeeper, just listen to what I say and keep quiet.
Camilla said, mocking me. Realizing it was a waste of time, I started preparing for work. While I worked, Camilla lounged on the sofa, eating snacks and watching TV. I debated telling Andrew about the situation but didn't want to drag him into a sibling quarrel. Camilla puts on a good front in front of Andrew, so it probably looks like we're living harmoniously. While I was hanging laundry, "How long are you planning to stay here?" Camilla suddenly asked. "I have to take care of Dad. I can't just leave," I said while hanging the clothes.
It's going to be a problem if you don't leave. The baby is coming soon. You need to free up your room for us.
My husband and I were using the bedroom that Richard used to occupy. This room is the largest in the house. That's impossible. I refused, and she just said, okay, and backed off easily. The next day, while I was working, Camilla, usually lazing on the sofa, seemed to be up to something. Busy with work, I didn't pay much attention until I went to my room and was shocked. The long-running manga I had collected since childhood, and the accessories and clothes I bought as a reward for myself upon employment, were all gone. Instead, the floor was covered with baby items. I rushed down the stairs and confronted Camilla relaxing in the living room.
Camilla, where did you put the stuff from my room? It was in the way, so I sold it. If you're not leaving, we need the space. Your room is going to be the baby's room. I cleaned it up for you, so you should be thankful, she said nonchalantly, showing no sign of remorse. It's unacceptable to sell someone's belongings without permission. Bring them back now.
I'm usually calm, but I couldn't remain so this time. Each item was filled with memories and treasured by me.
Why are you so angry? You always say to move if I can, so I did while I could. There's no money left, just give up,
she said, disinterestedly shifting her gaze back to the TV. Among the items Camilla sold was the engagement ring Andrew had given me. I insisted she buy it back, but she claimed she had no money and went back to her room. I told Andrew about everything that had happened so far, including today's incident, and apologized for the engagement ring being sold. Andrew was shocked to hear the story but immediately went to buy back the ring, and thankfully, we were able to retrieve it. Since then, I started paying more attention to Camilla's actions. I noticed that Camilla goes out a lot for someone who is pregnant. She lazes around during the day, but leaves in the evening and often returns late at night or in the morning. I hadn't worried about it before since Camilla has always been more active at night, but I wondered what she could be doing while pregnant. I discussed it with Richard and Andrew, and we decided to investigate her actions. One day, I secretly followed Camilla, who had dressed up and left the house. She walked confidently, as if she knew exactly where she was going, and entered a busy downtown area. She stopped in front of a hotel and waited for someone. A man arrived, and it was clear he wasn't William. I had suspected something, but seeing them enter the hotel arm in arm confirmed my fears. I immediately contacted William. When I told him about Camilla's affair, he was shocked, having thought she had come back home early for the birth, but he quickly hired a detective agency to investigate. William reported the investigation results to us while Camilla was out. The investigation confirmed Camilla's affair. Moreover, from conversations between Camilla and her lover, Johnny, it was revealed that the child Camilla was carrying was Johnny's. Hearing the report, Richard turned pale and, in tears,
William, my foolish daughter has done something terrible. She's ruined her life. I don't know how I can ever make amends.
He apologized to William.
Richard, please don't apologize. I'm angry at Camilla, not at you. We may be family, but we are different people. It's my fault for not seeing her true nature.
Camilla betraying such a man of character was beyond foolish. We agreed to gather on Saturday when Camilla would be home, and then we adjourned. Saturday. The sound of the front door opening echoed.
I'm sorry for intruding.
William appeared in the living room.
William, you didn't say you were coming today. What's up? The baby's gotten quite big, hasn't it?
Camilla, rubbing her belly, smiled and spoke to William, oblivious that he knew everything.
Camilla, is the child in your belly really mine?
William asked Camilla without changing his expression.
What are you saying? Are you accusing me of cheating?
Camilla angrily retorted to William's words.
Camilla, I know everything. The child is Johnny's, isn't it? I had a detective agency investigate, so lying is pointless. I can't continue a marriage with someone who cheats. Let's get a divorce.
William spoke calmly and matter-of-factly. Camilla, panicking, tried to pretend she knew nothing.
William, what are you talking about? The child in my belly is yours. We're not getting a divorce.
Camilla denied it, but William placed the photos from the detective agency of Johnny and her on the table.
Can you still say you haven't cheated after seeing these?
Camilla looked shocked at the photos, but claimed,
It's not what it looks like. He was just giving me advice. It's terrible you would doubt me.
There's no need for hotel meetings for advice, I retorted, frustrated by Camilla's refusal to admit her affair.
So, how do you explain this?
William played an audio recording obtained by the detective agency.
Camilla, your belly has gotten quite big.
Yes, it's because it's your child. It's going to be adorable.
He doesn't know it's my child, does he?
Don't worry, William is clueless.
I married him for his money anyway. I want to raise your child without any financial troubles, so it had to be someone wealthy.
William stopped the recording there.
Too bad I found out, he said.
Camilla's face turned pale. Upon hearing the audio for the first time, Richard, with his face flushed red and shaking with anger.
Camilla, do you not have a conscience? All you think about is using people. It's high time you learn some shame,
he exclaimed. Perhaps realizing there was no way out, she defiantly retorted.
It's my child, no matter who the father is. It will be Dad's first grandchild regardless, so what's the problem? I'm going to have this child and raise it here.
Unable to contain my anger at Camilla's defiant outburst.
Camilla, how much trouble do you have to cause Dad before you're satisfied? Do you have any idea how much you've made him suffer because of you?
I yelled louder than I ever have before. Camilla turned to me.
A useless person who can't even have children has no right to speak. Dad would be happier living with me, who can show him a grandchild's face, than with an unfilial person like you.
And she laughed triumphantly as if she had one.
What did you say? I exploded. Jealous because Dad pays more attention to me, right? Always playing the perfect student, but now you're the inferior one because you can't have children. The baby chose me, not you, so you should leave this house. What do you know, Camilla? How much do you think I've suffered because of you? Both of you, stop. Camilla, I don't care about the grandchild, just leave.
Richard intervened. Camilla looked stunned by Richard's demand.
Eh? Dad, why do I have to leave? It should be her. Camilla, I'm done cleaning up your messes. I can't deal with this anymore. I don't care about seeing the grandchild. Just leave within a week.
Camilla couldn't accept Richard's words. That's cruel. Dad, are we not family? And with that, she began to cry.
You only think about yourself, acting out of self-interest. You've belittled Johanna and now betrayed William. You might want my inheritance, but I've decided to leave most of it to Johanna, who has sincerely taken care of me and kept our home together.
Richard declared this in front of everyone. Soon after, William added,
Camilla, please sign here. I'll be filing for divorce immediately after this. And don't forget about the alimony.
Camilla, cornered by everyone, slammed the table.
Is it fun for all of you to gang up on me? What's wrong with loving someone I truly care about? I've always loved Johnny. You should be grateful that a dull man like you got to marry me and was about to have a family.
She yelled.
Is that all you have to say? Then sign quickly.
William remained calm throughout. He no longer seemed to regard Camilla as a fellow human. His look was akin to observing an animal.
If you divorce me, you'll never find another wife, William. Don't come regretting it later.
Camilla angrily signed the divorce papers and threw them at William. William filed the papers immediately, and they became strangers. The next day, just to be sure, a DNA test was conducted to confirm if the baby really was Johnny's. The test scientifically proved the baby wasn't William's, and when Richard told Camilla to leave, "Why should I be the one to leave? Shouldn't the failure over there leave?" Camilla lashed out. Having no place to go after being kicked out, Camilla went to Johnny's, only to run into his wife. A confrontation ensued, leading to Johnny's divorce. Camilla, playing the tragic heroine denied true love, happily remarried the man she truly loved and gave birth to a healthy baby. Johnny, who had entered into a marriage of convenience due to his failing family business, lost his financial support and assets. Previously a nominal president at his wife's company, Johnny couldn't find work anywhere and resorted to part-time jobs to scrape by. Camilla and Johnny, living in a cheap apartment with shared toilets and no bath, struggled with living expenses due to alimony payments to Johnny's ex-wife and William. Constant financial stress led to frequent arguments, and despite wanting a divorce, neither could afford to leave, resulting in a loveless marriage. Where did their true love go? Camilla struggled daily with odd jobs, part-time work, childcare, and household chores. Unaccustomed to housework, the home was always a mess. Camilla, who had always lived lavishly on others' money, now wore old clothes and an apron, a stark contrast to her former stylish self. Despite their hardships, both put effort into parenting. I returned to a peaceful life, taking care of Richard. I occasionally keep in touch with William, who I worried might become distrustful of women. However, he reconnected with his first love at a reunion and is now in a serious relationship. The day William told me he had a girlfriend, I received another piece of joyful news. Our continued fertility treatments were successful, and we were expecting a child. Actually, twins. We shared the news with Richard, and now the three of us eagerly await the arrival of our babies.